Clara woke before sunrise, feeling the cold morning wind slip through the broken window of the small cabin. She had lived on this dusty frontier land since childhood. But lately the homestead felt heavier with each passing day. Food was low, the animals were sick, and her stepfather's temper grew worse whenever trouble came. Her mother tried to keep peace in the house, but even she looked tired and frightened these days. Clara stepped outside to breathe and gather water. Not knowing this would be the last morning she would see her home in the same way. The sun rose slowly, warming the dry earth, and Clara noticed her stepfather standing near the fence. Whispering with two strangers, they wore leather, beads, and feathers, and their horses were strong and painted for travel. She recognized them as Apache warriors from a nearby band, the same ones who sometimes traded meat or herbs for tools. But today their faces looked serious, and they glanced toward Clara more than once. A cold feeling settled in her stomach, but she tried to ignore it. Her stepfather called her name in a tone that made her heart tighten. She walked toward him slowly, and he folded his arms, avoiding her eyes. Her mother stood nearby, wringing her hands like she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Clara asked what was happening, but no one answered at first. Then her stepfather said something she could not believe. "They are here for you," he said flatly. Clara felt her breath stop, her mind going blank as the words hit her. Her stepfather continued talking, but it sounded far away, like a distant echo. He explained that the family was running out of food, and the Apache offered supplies to help them survive. But they wanted Clara as part of the agreement. Her mother cried softly, saying it was the only way to save the homestead. Clara shook her head, saying no, saying she wasn't property to be traded. But her stepfather grabbed her arm and told her they had no choice. The Apache warriors approached calmly, not harsh or forceful, but with authority. The taller one stepped forward and introduced himself as Coda. He was broad-shouldered, strong, and carried himself like someone who had seen many battles. People feared him because of his reputation for bravery and boldness. Clara had heard stories that made him seem like a dangerous man. Seeing him so close made her knees weaken. But Coda did not look at her with anger or cruelty. His dark eyes studied her quietly, as if he was trying to understand the person in front of him. He spoke in steady English, telling her she would not be harmed. He said she would be under his protection now. Clara had no idea what that meant, and fear filled her heart again. Her mother tried to hug her, but her stepfather pulled her away, insisting the Apache had waited long enough. Clara felt her world collapse as Coda offered his horse. Expecting her to mount, she refused at first, trembling, but her stepfather pushed her forward. Clara stumbled and grabbed the saddle, holding back tears. Coda watched silently, his jaw tight, like he disapproved of how her stepfather treated her. When she finally climbed onto the horse, her mother whispered a broken apology. Clara felt anger and heartbreak mixing in her chest. She wanted to scream at them, to ask why her life was worth less than a few sacks of food. But the words wouldn't come, only silent tears. Coda mounted his own horse beside her, giving her a small nod. The other warriors formed a line behind them, ready to begin the long ride back to their camp. Clara looked back at the cabin one last time, the place that once held childhood memories but now felt like a cage that had thrown her away. Her stepfather didn't even lift his hand in goodbye. Her mother cried into her apron, unable to watch her daughter leave. As they rode away, Clara sat stiff and silent, staring at the horizon so she wouldn't break down. Coda kept a respectful distance, not touching her or speaking unless necessary. He guided the horse pads with calm control, watching her carefully. Clara expected him to bark orders or treat her roughly, but he didn't. He rode beside her like he didn't want to frighten her more than she already was. Hours passed and the land opened into wide plains and tall cliffs. Clara wondered if she would ever see her home again. But deeper inside, she wondered something else too. Why did Coda look at her with a strange softness she didn't expect? And why did his voice, though firm, hold no cruelty? She didn't know it yet. But this journey would reveal that the bold Apache warrior who now led her away carried a heart far gentler than anyone had ever told her. The Apache camp came into view just as the sun dipped behind the red cliffs. Clara felt her breath tighten as she saw the fires, the tents, the horses, and the people who all paused to look in her direction, she felt like a stranger in another world. One she never asked to enter, Coda rode ahead with steady confidence. But Clara stayed a few steps behind, trying to shrink herself from all the curious eyes. When they reached the center of the camp, an older woman with long silver hair approached Coda. She looked at Clara with a mix of confusion and disapproval. Clara understood without words that this woman wanted answers. Coda spoke briefly in Apache, his voice deep and calm, and the woman's expression softened only a little. Clara had no idea what was said, but she felt small under their gaze. More people gathered, whispering, curious, and sometimes openly judging. Some young women looked her up and down, their eyes sharp with jealousy. Clara felt her cheeks burn. Wishing she could disappear, she wondered if they all hated her already. Coda placed himself slightly in front of her, not touching her, but creating a space so no one came too close. Clara didn't understand why that small gesture made her feel a little safer. The marriage ritual was simple and quick. A few elders spoke words Clara could not understand. Coda nodded respectfully, and Clara followed awkwardly. Someone tied a small woven band around her wrist to mark her as Coda's wife. Clara felt the weight of it like a chain she could not break. When the ritual ended, Clara braced herself, expecting Coda to take control or demand obedience. That was what she had heard about men like him, but instead, he stepped back and looked at her with quiet distance. He pointed toward a tent near his own, a smaller one with a clean blanket and a small clay pot inside. "This is yours," he said simply. He did not enter. Nor did he expect her to enter his home. Clara stared at him, confused. He was bold, feared, respected. Yet he acted as if he didn't want to scare her. The night grew colder, and Clara wrapped herself in the blanket inside the tent. She could hear the camp settling. The soft drums, the laughter around fires, and the sharp cry of an eagle far away. Coda's silhouette moved outside his own tent, quiet and controlled. Clara wondered why he didn't come closer or speak to her again. Part of her felt relieved, and another part felt strangely lonely. The next morning, she woke to the sound of children running and women grinding corn. Clara stepped outside slowly, unsure where to go or what to do. Some people stared, others ignored her, but no one welcomed her. She tried to help at the water stream, but her hands shook as she carried the heavy pot. Two girls snickered behind her, whispering cruel words even if she didn't understand the language. Clara lowered her head, wishing home didn't feel so far away. As she walked up the bank, her foot slipped on a wet stone, sending her backward with a gasp before she fell. A strong hand grabbed her arm, steadying her. Coda had appeared almost out of nowhere. He pulled her upright, his face stern but not angry. The two girls froze, their smiles fading. Coda spoke sharply to them, and they ran off without another word. Clara looked at him, surprised he had defended her. He didn't say much, only asked, "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. Still catching her breath, his grip loosened gently, like he feared hurting her. Then, without warning, he stepped back and walked away. Keeping his rigid distance again, Clara watched him. Puzzled by the contrast, he was feared. Yet he protected her without hesitation. He was bold. Yet he seemed afraid to come too close that night. Clara found a folded shawl placed at the entrance of her tent. It was soft and warm, woven with patterns she recognized from Coda's clothing. She touched it carefully, realizing it was new, not something he had just found. Someone had taken time to make it, or choose it, and she had no doubt who it came from. Clara held the shawl against her chest. Overwhelmed by emotions she didn't understand, she still felt trapped, alone, and unsure of her place in this camp. But for the first time, she sensed something else too. Coda might have been the bold Apache warrior she feared, but there was something gentle behind his silence, something that felt like a heartbeat hidden beneath a shield. And Clara knew, even if she didn't want to admit it yet. This marriage built on silence and distance was slowly shifting, not through force, but through small, unexpected acts that made her question everything she thought she knew about the man she had been given to. Clara woke with a heavy feeling in her chest, unsure if it came from fear, loneliness, or simple exhaustion. The Apache camp was alive with movement. Voices and the smell of cooking corn. She watched women preparing food, children playing, and warriors fixing their horses. Everyone seemed to know their place except her. Clara felt like a leaf blown into a world she did not belong to. She stepped out of her small tent. Clutching the shawl Coda had left for her the night before, it still felt warm, and she wondered how early he must have risen to leave it without waking her. Her eyes moved toward his tent, where he stood sharpening a blade with careful movements. He didn't look at her, but Clara noticed his shoulders tense. As if he felt her watching, she quickly looked away, embarrassed by her own curiosity. Clara tried to help with chores, but every task seemed unfamiliar. She didn't know the rhythm of this life, didn't know when to speak or when to stay silent at the stream. She washed her face and filled a pot with water. Determined not to slip again, a few younger women whispered and laughed. Glancing at her, Clara ignored them, but their quiet mocking felt like tiny needles in her heart. As she walked back toward the camp, she noticed one of the women following her. The woman stopped her by standing in her path, looking Clara up and down with narrowed eyes. Clara didn't understand the words spoken, but the tone was sharp, almost threatening. The woman grabbed the pot from Clara's hands and shoved it aside, splashing water across the sand. Clara stepped back, frightened and confused. She tried to explain she meant no harm, but the woman moved closer, pushing her again. Clara's foot slipped in the dirt and she braced herself for a fall. Before she hit the ground, two strong hands caught her. Coda had appeared with startling speed, pulling Clara behind him in one swift movement. His voice, usually quiet, echoed through the camp with sharp authority. The woman's face changed instantly, and she backed away, her anger fading into shame. Coda took a step forward, speaking with deep firmness that made everyone pause. Even without knowing the language, Clara understood he was telling the woman to never touch her again. When the woman left, Coda finally turned toward Clara. His eyes scanned her quickly, checking for injuries. "Did she hurt you?" he asked, his usually steady voice carrying a hint of worry. Clara shook her head, still shaken, but unharmed. Coda's jaw tightened, like the idea of her being hurt stirred something fierce inside him. He picked up the pot, shook off the remaining sand, and handed it back to her without a word for a moment. They stood close enough for Clara to hear the steady beat of his breath, but as quickly as he had rushed in, Coda stepped back again, keeping his careful distance. He walked away toward the horses, leaving Clara staring after him, wondering why the bold warrior seemed afraid of getting too close. Later, while the sun climbed higher, Clara tried to settle her thoughts. She wandered toward the edge of the camp, hoping silence might calm her heart there. She saw Coda teaching a group of children how to braid rope. He knelt down to their level, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. The children laughed and tugged at his braids, and he let them without complaint. Clara watched with growing confusion. This wasn't the fierce warrior her stepfather had described. This wasn't the man everyone claimed was cold and dangerous. Coda glanced up and caught her watching. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks and turned to walk away, but he called out gently, "You can stay." She hesitated, then slowly approached, unsure if she was welcome. A little girl placed a long piece of rope in Clara's hands. Urging her to try, Clara sat on the ground and clumsily copied the braids. Coda watched her quietly, correcting her only when she asked. For the first time since coming to the camp, Clara felt the smallest spark of belonging when the lesson ended. Coda stood and brushed the dirt from his hands. He walked halfway toward her, then paused, struggling to find words. "You should not go alone by the river or the cliff," he said. It sounded more like concern than command. Clara nodded. Touched by the care hidden inside the warning, he looked like he wanted to say more, maybe even smile, but his expression tightened. And he stepped back again, as if drawn behind an invisible wall. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She replayed every moment of the day, especially the way Coda rushed to save her without thinking. She remembered the worry in his voice, the gentleness with the children, the silent gift of the shawl. All the small pieces formed a picture she wasn't expecting. The bold Apache warrior had a hidden softness. One he guarded carefully from the world. Clara lay awake, listening to the wind, wondering why someone so strong would bury such a gentle heart, and why he chose to show glimpses of it to her, even if he kept his distance. Clara woke to a strange stillness in the camp. The air felt heavy, and there was no morning laughter from the children. Women whispered nervously, while warriors moved with tense alertness. Clara sensed something was wrong even before she stepped outside her tent. Coda stood near the outer edge of the camp, speaking with two scouts who had returned breathless and dust-covered. His expression was strict, not angry but sharply focused. Clara watched his posture stiffen, and the entire camp seemed to hold its breath as he gave instructions. The scouts ran off again, and Coda lifted a spear from a horse saddle, checking its blade with quick, expert hands. Clara approached slowly, unsure if she should speak. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Coda looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Rival band," he said. "They come close." His eyes were calm, but the seriousness of his tone made Clara's heart pound. Mothers gathered their children and rushed them toward the center of the camp. Elders carried baskets of herbs for injuries that had not yet happened. The tension in the air grew thicker with every passing second. Clara felt fear crawl up her spine, but she tried to steady herself. A faint shout echoed from the hills, then another, sharper and closer. Coda immediately stepped in front of Clara, his body shifting into protective stance. "Stay here," he said, guiding her behind a tent where she could crouch safely. Clara grabbed his arm for a second, unable to hide the fear in her eyes. "Will you be all right?" she whispered. Coda paused, and an emotion flickered in his eyes. Something warm. Something human. "I will return," he said softly. Then he moved toward the danger with swift, controlled strides. The attack came fast. Warriors from the rival band rushed down the slope, shouting and throwing spears toward the camp. Apache warriors retaliated, forming a tight line to push them back. Clara huddled behind the tent, her heart racing as she watched flashes of movement and heard the clash of weapons. Her fear for Coda grew with every second. She saw him fight with skill and boldness she had only heard stories about. He defended two young boys who had been caught near the outer tents, pulling them behind him and shielding them with his own body. Clara could hardly breathe as she saw him strike down one attacker, then another, moving with precision and strength. But in the middle of the fight, Clara noticed something terrifying. Coda staggered for a moment, a rival warrior's blade grazing his side. He didn't fall, but Clara saw the dark stains spreading on his shirt. Despite the wound, he pushed forward, driving the attackers toward the hills until they finally retreated. When the chaos ended, the camp buzzed with relief and exhaustion. Clara ran toward Coda, ignoring the ache in her legs and the tremble in her hands. He stood near a tent pole, one hand pressed against his side. He tried to hide the injury, but Clara saw the blood clearly. "You're hurt," she said, her voice thick with worry. "It is nothing," he replied, though his breath was uneven. Clara guided him gently into her tent before anyone could stop her. She grabbed water, clean cloth, and herbs she had learned to use from watching the healers. Coda sat quietly, watching her with guarded eyes as she knelt beside him. "Let me help," she said, her voice firm. He hesitated, but finally nodded, pulling aside his shirt so she could reach the wound. As she cleaned the injury, she noticed his muscles tense and relax. He was in pain, but he didn't make a sound. Clara worked with steady hands, despite her shaking heart. "You shouldn't have fought like that while protecting the children," she said softly. Coda looked at her, his gaze warm despite the situation. "It is my duty," he replied, "and they are my people." Clara paused. Meeting his eyes and me, she whispered. "Am I your people too?" Coda lowered his head, letting out a slow breath that seemed to carry weight he had held for a long time. "You were given to me not by choice," he said, "but still, I protect what is mine." Clara felt her chest tighten at the word mine, not with fear, but with confusion and something else she didn't want to name yet. Coda looked away, his voice quieter now. "I did not want a forced marriage," he admitted. "I said yes because I knew the man they would have given you to. And he is cruel." Clara froze, her hands still resting near the bandage. "So you saved me," she whispered. He met her eyes again, and for the first time, Clara saw vulnerability beneath his bold exterior. "Yes," he said, "I saved you." Clara's heartbeat softened, and a warmth spread in her chest. She tied the bandage with careful hands. Feeling the distance between them shrink, Coda didn't speak further, but the silence felt different, gentler, calmer, almost tender. As the evening light glowed through the tent walls, Clara realized something. The truth had finally come out. The bold Apache warrior she had feared was not her captor. He was her protector, and for the first time, she saw the full depth of the gentle heart he tried so hard to hide beneath his warrior's pride. The camp slowly returned to its normal rhythm after the attack, but Clara felt changed. Something inside her had shifted when she tended Coda's wound for the first time. She saw him not as a feared warrior, but as a man carrying a weight she didn't understand. Every moment since then felt heavier with unspoken questions. Whispers of truth she wanted to know. Coda avoided resting even though he was injured. He helped repair tents, checked on the children, and moved through the camp with the same quiet discipline. Clara watched him from a distance. Noticing the slight limp in his step, he hid the pain well, but not well enough to fool her anymore that evening. Clara brought him a bowl of warm stew prepared by one of the older women. She approached carefully, unsure if he would accept it. He looked up when she stood in front of him, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You should rest," she said softly. Holding out the bowl, Coda hesitated, then took it from her hands without argument. It was the first time he allowed her to help him without resistance. They sat beside a small fire a few feet apart. As the sky darkened into a blanket of stars, the camp was quieter than usual. Everyone recovering from the day's events, Clara glanced at Coda. Noticing the firelight reflecting off the tired lines on his face, she realized he carried more than physical wounds. Something deeper lived in his silence. After a long pause, she asked the question that had been heavy in her heart. "Why do you keep your distance from me?" Coda didn't answer immediately. He stared into the flames, his jaw tightening, as if he was deciding how much truth he could reveal. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and unsteady. "It is not because I do not care," he said. "It is because I remember." Clara's breath caught. "Remember what?" she asked gently. Coda closed his eyes for a moment, as if pulling a memory from a locked place in his heart. "I had a wife," he said. The words fell heavily between them. "She died many winters ago during a raid." Clara felt her heart soften with sorrow. "She was brave, strong," he continued, "and she trusted me to protect her." A long pause followed. "I failed," he whispered. Clara didn't speak, letting the silence cradle his pain. He kept his gaze fixed on the fire, refusing to look at her. "The raiders came at night," he said slowly. "I fought them, but there were too many." His voice trembled just enough for Clara to notice. "When I reached her, she was already gone." Clara pressed a hand to her chest. Feeling the ache of his grief as if it were her own, Coda finally looked at her, his eyes raw with memories since that night. "I decided I would not let anyone close," he said. "I would not let myself care again." Clara understood now why he built walls around himself, why he kept her at a distance, why he acted bold around others, but gentle only in small, hidden ways. He wasn't avoiding her out of coldness. He was protecting himself from the pain of losing someone again. She reached out slowly, placing her hand on his arm. He tensed at first, then relaxed just slightly. "You didn't fail her," Clara whispered. "You fought for her." Coda shook his head, his voice rigid with guilt. "I could not save her," he said. "That is what I remember every time I look at you." Clara's eyes softened. "You look at me and see the fear of losing someone again," she said quietly. He nodded. Unable to speak for a moment, Clara scooted a little closer, not enough to break his boundaries, but enough to show she wasn't afraid. "You saved me," she said. "You kept me from being given to someone cruel." Coda looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "And today, you protected the children even while wounded," she added. "That is not failure." The fire crackled softly as the night grew colder. Coda's shoulders lowered, the tension slowly melting from his body for the first time. Clara saw him breathe without the weight of guilt crushing him. "You think too kindly of me," he said, his voice quiet. "No," Clara replied. "I see what is true." A faint, almost invisible smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It was small, shy, and gone in a moment, but Clara saw it. They sat together in gentle silence. The first real silence that didn't feel like distance. Above them, the stars shimmered like tiny lanterns holding their secrets. Clara felt closer to him than she had since arriving in the camp. She understood him now, his fears, his past, and the heart he guarded so fiercely. And Coda, though he said nothing, felt something shift inside him as well. For the first time since his first wife's death, he allowed someone to sit beside him without feeling the need to pull away. He didn't know what the future held, but as he looked at Clara, he realized something he never expected. She was beginning to heal a part of him he thought would remain broken forever. The morning after their quiet talk by the fire, the camp felt softer to Clara. She moved through it with a lighter heart, no longer feeling like an unwanted outsider. People still watched her, but the looks were different now. There was curiosity instead of hostility, respect instead of cold judgment. Maybe it was because they had seen her care for Coda during the attack. Or maybe it was because Coda himself seemed changed. He didn't keep as much distance as before. He still spoke few words, but when he did, his tone held a gentle warmth that had never been there openly. Clara caught him glancing at her sometimes, and each time he quickly looked away. It made her smile in a way she couldn't hide for the first time. She sensed something growing between them that was not forced at all. But that peace didn't last long. Around midday, the camp dogs began barking loudly, horses shifted nervously, and warriors paused from their tasks. A cloud of dust rose from the ridge. Clara felt her heart thud when she recognized the figures approaching. A group of settlers was riding toward the camp. Among them was her stepfather. His presence made her stomach tighten with old pain. He rode confidently, as if he owned the land he was trespassing on. Behind him were two men she recognized from the homestead. Each carrying rifles, Coda moved forward immediately. Placing himself between Clara and the approaching men, his expression was calm but firm. He did not reach for a weapon. But his body was ready if the need came, when the settlers reached the edge of the camp. Clara's stepfather lifted his chin arrogantly. "I've come for the girl," he announced. Coda didn't move. "This is Apache land," he said quietly. "You do not command anything here," Clara's stepfather glared at her. "Clara, come here now," he ordered. His tone was the same one he used when she was a child. The tone that made her feel small and powerless. For a brief second, fear tugged at her. But then she remembered Coda's wound, his past, his kindness hidden beneath layers of silence. She remembered the shawl, the way he defended her, the way he trusted her enough to speak his truth. She stepped forward, but not toward her stepfather. She stood beside Coda, close enough for their shoulders to almost touch. Her stepfather's eyes widened with shock. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "You are coming home." Clara shook her head slowly. "This is my home now," she said, her voice steady, even though her hands trembled. "I stay here." Her stepfather barked a harsh laugh. "You've lost your mind," he snapped. "They forced you into this." Clara's voice did not waver. "I was traded," she said. "But this choice now is mine." One of the settlers stepped forward angrily. "You think that Savage cares for you?" he shouted. "He'll use you and toss you aside at that." Coda turned his head slightly, his eyes darkening. But Clara held up her hand, gently, silent assurance that she didn't need protection from words. "You don't know him," she said, looking straight at the settlers. "You don't know the man he is." She felt Coda's gaze fall on her, but she kept her focus forward. "My stepfather gave me away for food," she continued. "Coda has given me respect." Her words hung in the air like a truth that could not be challenged. The settlers muttered among themselves. Unsure how to respond, Coda took a small step forward then. Addressing Clara's stepfather directly, "She stays because she chooses," he said. "Not because she is held." The words came out calm, but carried the weight of a man who rarely spoke his heart aloud. Her stepfather frowned, confused and irritated. "You're welcome at home," he said, "but if you stay here, Don't expect us to come looking next time you're in trouble? Clara lifted her chin. I don't expect anything from people who sold me, she said quietly. The settler stiffened at her honesty, and her stepfather's face reddened with anger and shame. Without another word, he turned his horse sharply and rode away. The other men followed, glancing back once before disappearing over the ridge. Silence settled over the camp. Everyone looked at Clara, waiting for her reaction. But she simply breathed out slowly, like she had released a weight she had carried for years. Coda turned to her, his expression unreadable. You chose to stay, he said softly. Clara met his eyes. I chose you, she replied, her voice trembling with emotion she could no longer hide. For a long moment, Coda didn't move or speak. Then his eyes softened in a way she had never seen, not even on the quiet night by the fire. He reached out gently, touching her hand, not claiming her, but acknowledging her choice. It was the first time he touched her without fear or hesitation. The camp watched silently, but no one spoke. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest, not just from relief, but from the understanding that something had changed forever between them. She wasn't the girl who had been traded anymore. She was the woman who chose her own place in the world, and she chose to stand beside the bold Apache with the gentle heart. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The days following Clara's choice felt different for the entire camp. People watched her with new eyes, no longer seeing a frightened outsider, but a woman who had stood her ground. Even the older women who once whispered about her greeted her with small, respectful nods. Children ran to her without hesitation, pulling her toward games or asking her to help braid their hair. Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years: belonging. Coda changed too, though he tried not to show it. He still moved with the same discipline, the same quiet strength. But there was a softness in the way he looked at Clara now. He didn't hide his gaze whenever she walked by. He didn't step away when she came near. The distance he once guarded so fiercely had slowly disappeared. One morning, Clara woke to the sound of coughs from the neighboring tent. A young boy had gotten sick during the cold night, and his mother looked exhausted from worry. Clara knelt beside them and placed her hand on the boy's forehead. He was burning with fever. She remembered simple remedies her own mother used to make. May I help? Clara asked gently. The mother nodded gratefully. Clara rushed to gather herbs she had learned about from watching the healers. She boiled water over a small fire, crushed the leaves, and mixed them carefully. The boy drank the warm brew while his mother held him close. Within hours, his fever eased. Word spread through the camp about Clara's help, and people began coming to her for small remedies or advice. She felt useful for the first time since she had arrived. Coda noticed, of course. He watched her with quiet pride as she moved from tent to tent, helping whoever needed her. When she finally returned to her own tent for a moment of rest, Coda approached her slowly. You bring peace to the people, he said. Clara looked up at him, surprised at his praise. I only do what I can, she replied. Coda shook his head softly. You do more than you know. His words warmed her heart in a way she couldn't fully explain. Before she could say anything else, a scout approached the camp with alarming news. The nearby river had dried more quickly than expected. Without water, the camp would struggle to feed the horses, cook food, or take care of the wounded. A drought was spreading across the land, and the tribe needed a solution. Coda gathered the elders and warriors to discuss what to do. Clara listened from the edge of the circle, her brow furrowed in concern. After the meeting, Coda approached her again. We will search for water tomorrow, he said. The land is changing. I want to help, Clara replied without hesitation. Coda hesitated, clearly unsure if it was safe for her, but Clara's determination made him soften. You may come, he said quietly. Stay close. The next morning, Clara joined Coda and a small group of scouts as they rode across the dry plains. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the ground cracked beneath their horses. Clara squinted at the horizon, searching for any sign of moisture. Hours passed without success. The group grew tired, but Coda refused to give up. At one point, Clara noticed a cluster of green plants growing near a rocky ridge. She pointed them out quickly. Coda dismounted and examined the ground. When he dug a little deeper with his blade, damp soil appeared beneath the surface. His eyes lit up with relief. "There's water here," he said. Clara smiled, proud she could contribute. The group returned to the camp with the good news. People rejoiced, and warriors immediately began digging to access the water below. For the first time, Clara felt she had done something important for all of them. Not just for Coda, not just for herself, but for the entire tribe that evening. The camp came alive with celebration. Drums echoed against the cliffs, and firelight danced across smiling faces. Children played, women prepared food, and elders offered blessings for the renewed hope. Coda stood beside Clara, watching the scene with quiet satisfaction. At one point, an elder approached them both. He placed his hand on Coda's shoulder and then on Clara's. "You two bring strength together," he said. "The tribe sees it." Clara felt warmth rise in her cheeks. Coda bowed his head respectfully, though his eyes lingered on Clara with unmistakable affection. As the night deepened, Clara and Coda walked away from the noise. They stopped near a tall cliff where the moonlight painted the earth in silver. Coda took a slow breath, gathering courage for words he had held inside for too long. "You chose me that day," he said softly. "I have not forgotten." Clara stepped closer, her voice gentle. "I didn't just choose to stay. I chose you." Coda reached out and held her hand, his touch warm and steady. "I did not think I could care for anyone again," he admitted. "But you healed something in me." Clara's heart swelled with emotion. "And you showed me kindness when I expected nothing but fear," she said. They stood in the quiet glow of moonlight, two souls who had been broken in different ways, now bound not by force, not by fear, but by trust and growing love. Clara leaned her head gently against Coda's shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her for the first time without hesitation. The bold Apache warrior no longer hid his gentle heart, and Clara, once traded away like she meant nothing, now stood with the man who saw her worth more clearly than anyone ever had. The story of fear and force had become a story of choice and tenderness, a story of healing, a story of two hearts finding their way to each other beneath the endless, quiet sky.